tricksters are unpredictable to people who cling to order. They dance the line of between order and chaos, between light and dark, between masculine and feminine, between good and evil.
When I think of the trickster, certain words that I think of is change, dichotomy, and contrast. All right, so today we about to be talking about the trickster archetype, the misconceptions and what it means and how it shows up in our life. And if you carry the trickster archetype, me and Saint, was we was going to do another video, but then we both discovered we had that archetype, and we like, no, we gotta do that. Let's do that first and just build on that. Just go from there. So, bro, let's we can get straight into it. Can you introduce yourself first?
All right, what's going on, y'all? I go by the name Lucius Tenebris, aka Saint the Daemon. I've been practicing the occult sciences consistently for about maybe 2 years or so, but I was an armchair occultist since like 2017. But it's been a long journey, and I'm happy to be here.
Speaking of the armchair occultist, can you just briefly talk about how important that part of the person's journey is?
Indeed. So for me, I started off as an armchair occultist, and for those of you who don't know what an armchair occultist is, it's an occult scientist who just reads occult books and doesn't actually practice, right? And so I started off that way in 2017. And for me, that's how I had to come into this, because it's a big responsibility. You're taking a dive into the unknown. And for me, I have a history of being somewhat of a control freak, meaning that I need to know what the hell I'm getting into before I get into something. And so for me, I needed to read. I needed to make sure that I knew what the fuck I was getting into before I made any mistakes. And so I did that for a couple of years until I was comfortable enough to actually take an initial step and actually practice a magical ritual. And then even when I did practice, I was just a casual dabbler. That means someone who like occasionally practices every now and then. But I didn't get serious until I started to practice the Black School of St. Cyprian of Antioch. It's taught by occult scientist Jason Miller. So when I started that system, that's when I really hunkered down and got serious and actually started practicing consistently.
Yeah, it comes to the point where you're just reading so much, you're like, all right, man, let me do something, because I need this to change, I need this to change. And sometimes even when we step into that point where we say, all right, we need to practice something, most of the times it's starting with like something material. It's starting with low magic, but it's the step that counts.
Indeed. When you take that first step, that's a big deal. What you're stating to your awareness and to existence is that I'm ready to put my big boy boots on. I'm ready to consciously will my life to go into the direction in which I feel it's meant to go, or the direction I feel is right to go. You grab your life by the reins rather than just allow yourself to wind up anywhere blindly drifting and coasting.
All right, so this trickster, the fool, the joker, pure chaos, fire, agent of change, all the stuff we correspond with this archetype with, most notably popularized by Carl Jung. I just recently discovered I hold this, especially after this reading I had got with Brother Beniti. How it shows up for me, one aspect it shows up for me is being multifaceted, going to the spiritual aspect of it. What does that mean for the spirits that are categorized as the trickster archetype? Not just in a negative light. What does that mean to you? How has that materialized for you with the spirits that are shown that way or characterized that way?
What I've learned about the trickster archetype, or being a trickster, is that a trickster is a person who is usually going to be greatly misunderstood. And that's because a trickster has unconventional means or unconventional ways in which they achieve their goals or their objectives, or they have an unconventional way of seeing reality. They go based off of what they learn from experience. They're not as easily herded, right? I like to make the analogy with animals, right? They're humans who move and operate like sheep, right? And then there are humans who are more goat-like. And the difference between the two is sheep are a little more docile, right? Sheep go with the flow, right? The sheep doesn't really have defense. The way that they defend themselves is that they band together, right, in a flock, and make as much noise as possible, right? And they band together in the hopes that whatever predator it is that's hunting for them, like a wolf, for example, the wolf doesn't get to them, but gets to the sheep in front of them or next to them. So they try to band together in a flock. Now, as far as goats, goats are not as easily herded as sheep. Goats are a little more independently minded. They're stubborn. Goats have different ways that they could defend themselves, right? Some goats faint, right? They play dead, right? So that's that trickster element, right? They pretend and act like they're dead. Or other goats can flee and they can ascend up to the highest mountains and descend from those highest mountains. And so what I learned about tricksters are beings who can shift their perception, right? They could change the way that they perceive reality and thus change themselves. They're shapeshifters, transformers, in a sense, spiritually speaking.
Now, I was doing some research, and a snake is associated with the trickster. And
Indeed.
you know, it's crazy, bro. My dad's nickname is Snake.
It's deep.
So, like I said, bro, after I got that reading, it's just a bunch of aha moments.
Yeah. To bring up a point about the snake or the serpent, the snake or the serpent sheds its skin, right? It's constantly changing. It's constantly transforming. And so this is what you get with a trickster, right? A trickster, usually trickster gods, right? For example, like Odin, or gods that are associated with self-development. These are gods that are learning on the job, right? They learn through their experiences, right? So Odin, on his path, on his journey, there was a point where he sacrificed an eye for wisdom, right? There's a point where he sacrificed himself unto himself on a tree, I believe, for 9 days, right? And so this is how he accumulates and acquires his wisdom, right? Is through lived experience. And so tricksters are beings who approach life with a fresh set of eyes, and they're ready to tackle or deal with whatever it is that reality throws at them, because they understand that everything that they experience is all for their supreme growth and development, no matter how good or bad it may seem or appear. They're open. And so with that being open, that openness and that willingness to challenge their perceptions, they scare people, right? They tend to rub people wrong, because some people are not like that. They rather color within the lines, right? They rather walk the straight line and not turn or veer this way. Tricksters are unpredictable to people who cling to order. They dance the line of between order and chaos, between light and dark, between masculine and feminine, between good and evil.
For someone who has a trickster archetype, what are some of the things and themes that they may face in their life? As you was talking, I was thinking of sacrifice. So what are certain other things that may pop up in a life, especially if they're going through hard Saturn lessons? So I know sacrifice will be one of them. So what would you say are some other?
Sacrifice, and also letting go, which kind of ties into the same thing, right? Tricksters learn to let go. They're constantly shedding their skin like a serpent, right? You'll have highs and then you'll have lows, right? And you have to learn how to circumnavigate through the highs and through the lows. As a trickster, you're going to experience a lot of lows, because when you step out into the unknown, man is afraid of the unknown, right? We're 1 foot in the light, 1 foot in the dark, right? We know ourselves, but at the same time, we don't know ourselves. And there's so much more to us that we don't know than what we do know. And so a trickster is willing to continually step out into that unknown. And you're going to be isolated because of this, right? You're going to lose friends. You're going to lose people that you were connected to, because the more that you ascend spiritually, the more that you change and transform, it'll be to the point people that are comfortable around you, they won't recognize you anymore, because you start to grow in awareness, right? Your thinking changes, right? The way that you see reality and your relationship to it changes and transforms. And so you lose people. After a while, you'll be in the room with people who you've known for years, and then it feels like you can't relate.
Yeah, it's like it's not hitting.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sacrifice and letting go, and just being able to be strong. It's satisfied and self-sufficient. That's a big deal too with being a trickster. You have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable,
Yeah.
pretty much.
Yeah. Also, I think of you have to be intuitively driven instead of externally driven
Indeed.
because you will have to be isolated because people think isolation is punishment, but when you externally driven, that's not natural. Like you're gonna
Indeed.
have to be alone for a certain time. You know, you're gonna have to go into the hermit.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna have to go into the hermit mode so you can come back better and approach things with more strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Because another thing with the trickster, which is cross-reference with the fool, is he's walking and he's not watching his surroundings, and you have to be, I would say, self-validated,
Indeed.
but in a point of balance though, not to the point where you're validating your own bullshit, you
Indeed.
know,
Mm-hmm.
or you're not questioning yourself. I mean, even when it comes to that, questioning yourself, you can be in a point of balance to where it's like you're not beating yourself up. You can question yourself and criticize yourself, but all in a point of balance to where it's not you're beating yourself up. When you're alone, you feel like, damn, why am I going through this? I need I need some outside stimuli. You got enough stimuli in your head because of all these multifaceted aspects of yourself. When I think of the trickster, certain words that I think of is change, dichotomy, and contrast. Like I was saying, as it shows up with me, like, bro, I got all these skills, but they're all under a certain umbrella of the arts. I can paint, I can draw, I can make music, which goes into rapping, making beats, I can edit videos, do graphics, so it's like it's all of these things that add up to this one foundation. And if you're creative, especially, this goes into your personal brand.
Mm-hmm.
No matter the metaphysical concept, it all can be tied into being a creative. Do you point a difference with the trickster and the adversary? What's your take on that?
So, the adversary, in a sense, a trickster is an adversary. They identify with the adversary within. And when you become a trickster, to people who fear change, you will show up as an adversary, right? Because being a trickster, being a fool, right, is like being a clown. And when people meet a clown, they have all different types of reactions, right? Some people, when they see clowns, they get excited, right? They're immediately uplifted, right? And then there are other people who have like a deep-rooted fear of clowns, right? They're scared of clowns. But really, what the clown is a clown is a mirror, a doorway into the unconscious, right? Into the unseen. And so people usually project their own reflection onto the clown, right? And so people that you see that get scared of clowns, they're usually afraid of themselves, right? Maybe they're in the dark about who they really are, right? And then there are others who get excited when they meet a clown. So with being a trickster, being an adversary, that's how you're going to show up to people who don't want their way of perceiving reality, their thoughts, to be challenged,
Yeah.
right? They're comfortable staying in that box, but the trickster is going to force you out of your comfort zone, right? It's going to bring you out of that box. And so they're going to bring that which is unconscious, that which is unseen, out of you. With being a trickster, you have to really be strong. You have to be resilient, because you'll notice that our society, the way that we live, we don't live in a way that's emotionally healthy, right? Most people don't want to face that which they're in the dark about, and it's usually their emotions, right?
Yeah.
Because emotions are chaotic, right? And so people who don't want to face their emotions, oftentimes they'll project it onto the clown, onto the fool. You become an adversary. And I think a perfect example is Christ, right? Christ was a trickster. Christ was a fool, right? He challenged Judaism in the way that it was traditionally practiced. He would go into the temples and get into it with those who were the Pharisees, right? The high priests. right? And he would tell them to get these things out of my father's house. All of these things that you're bringing into the temple are corrupt and they have nothing to do with spirituality. And he'd flip the tables over. He would challenge the Sadducees. He would flip the written word on its face, right? Because according to Judaic law, right, Mosaic law, a woman or man who is found guilty of committing adultery is to be stoned to death. And if you recall, there was a point where they wanted to stone Mary Magdalene to death. And he said, let he who's without sin cast the first stone. Yeah. And so that's another example of him turning the written word order on its face, because he mentioned, hey, if you're going to stone her for these sins, right, then what you're pretty much saying is that you're next in line to be sinned too, because we all sin, right? And so this is what a trickster does. They challenge established norms, right? Christ would feed the poor and cure the sick, but he would do these things on the Sabbath day. And these are considered high transgressions against Yahweh. And so they're looking at him like, you're doing this on the Sabbath day? And he's pointing out to them how ridiculous it is to not help people who need help on the Sabbath day. But to them, that was evil to do that. That was challenging Yahweh's authority. And so Christ is a beautiful example of a trickster, of a fool archetype, right? A spiritual king. So the fool or the trickster is one who dances the line between order and chaos, right? Between rational and irrational. And they have nuanced perspective and a different way of seeing things. And again, people who are oriented towards order, right? People who like to color within the lines, people who like to remain within due bounds, they're going to only see this archetype as a problem, right? Governments.
When you saying this, I'm thinking of certain cardology suits. This is a thing with people who are four diamonds. And I've had examples of this in my life where four diamonds, people don't like their thoughts being challenged. King Von is a four of diamonds. XXX Tentacion is a four of diamonds. So I don't know if you know about those, but just to kind of give a perspective on that. As you saying this also, I'm just thinking of so many scenarios in my life where it connects, where it's like you saying something to people to challenge them, but they can't see outside of their south node.
Yep.
To where they think it's an insult or you can be an asshole. You know, I say tricksters can come off as an asshole because it's all for the betterment.
It's
But
all necessary.
even if you watch a video where somebody talk about their experience working with Loki, they will say Loki is going to keep throwing this shit in your face that you need to handle. Because if you don't face this, then you're not going to reach whatever goal. You're not going to have any scalable progress. Excuse me. Nothing is going to be scalable. I got this PDF about tricksters. And, I was looking over it. I got this one thing highlighted about the adversary. So they say the adversary plays a central role in all forms of left-hand path magic. It's he and other times she who teaches the initiate how to release the mind, how to think in a free way, breaking the boundaries inside and outside of ourselves.
Yes. I think to give a perfect example of the trickster, the adversary, how the adversary plays the role of trickster, the initiator, right? Because that's what a trickster is. A trickster is a spirit which initiates change, transformation. And so when we read the book of Job, right, we read that Job was a righteous servant, right? And that Job served Yahweh devoutly, and that Job walked around with an irrational fear of Yahweh in his heart, that there'd be times where Job would pray for his children just in case if they secretly cursed Yahweh in their hearts, right? This is someone who was devoutly afraid of Yahweh. And then there comes a time where there's a meeting in paradise, in heaven, and then in comes Satan, right? And this is something that a lot of people don't think about, right? I learned this from my working with Holy Saint Cyprian, who's also a trickster spirit. But if he's supposed to be cast out, right, how is he just showing up to this meeting in heaven? Who invited him if he's truly cast out? But the devil comes in and Yahweh greets him as such: from whence cometh you? And the devil's response is up and down, to and fro, all around the earth and on it. And so Yahweh begins to brag and boast about his servant Job. Have you seen my servant Job? There is none more righteous than he is, right? And so now the devil plays his role, right, of adversary, right, of offering a different perspective, challenging the notions or the views that God has on his servant Job. So he says, the only reason why he's this righteous is because look how much you take care of him. I guarantee that on the day that you take all of these gifts and blessings away, that he'll curse you to your face. God says, okay, do whatever you want, just don't harm him. And so then the next day, calamity befalls Job, right? He loses like all his livestock and his children die. He falls to the floor, right? He tears his clothes off, tears his hair out, and pours dust on his head, right? This was a ancient mourning ritual, right? Which we see take place in Judaism and other cultures before that. After this happens, the following year, there's another meeting in heaven, and in walks in the devil again. And Yahweh greets him the same way. From whence cometh he? From up and down, to and fro, all around the earth and on it. And so now Yahweh's a little perturbed. He's like, oh, what's up with you? Like, you told me to do all these things to Job, and you said that he cursed my name, and he didn't. Look, you made me torture him for no reason. And so then he offers another perspective. He says, the only reason why he hasn't cursed your name yet is because you haven't allowed any harm to befall him. I guarantee that on the day that you harm him, that he'll curse you to your face. And so then Yahweh says, okay, fine, do whatever you want to him. Just don't hurt him. I mean, just don't kill him. And so then Job falls sick, right? He gets these huge, painful boils all over his body, right? His fucking health declines. That's when he starts to say, curse the day that I was born, curse the stars, curse the darkness, curse all of these different things. Now it's about what your perspective is, right? Because some people would say, well, he cursed all of these other things, but he didn't curse God, right? But if God created the creation, right, his signature is in the creation. And so if you're cursing, right, the creation created by the creator and his signature is in the creation, and technically you're cursing the creator, right? But that's just an example of how a trickster plays, right? They offer a different perspective, right? They challenge what you believe to be right and wrong, right? They challenge what's normal, right?
Yeah.
They challenge convention. And so they get you to think and to perceive reality in different ways. And for some people, that's troubling. Some people aren't ready to do that.
Yeah.
But the trickster, the adversary, is the initiator of man, and is helping us to transform, to progress, and driving us to move forward rather than to remain stagnant. Because stagnancy, I think, is akin to death. We have to constantly be changing and transforming. Got to be evolving.
And that shit makes so much more sense to me, as going back to the cardology stuff, being the ace of diamonds, you know, with the ace being the first. Because I've been going by firstborn before I even got into cardology like 2-3 years ago. I would even attribute just the ace of diamonds suit in general to the trickster, thinking of certain people like Jay-Z. He's an ace of diamonds. How he's the initiator of everybody freestyling.
Yeah.
You know, think about it like that. He came out about his songwriting process. He's like, yeah, I build the song in my head pretty much.
Yep.
I build the song in my head.
You're right.
Go from there.
You're right about that. Before him, people weren't doing that, you know, because again, right, the trickster challenges convention. They challenge what we deem or establish to be normal. And originally, before, like you mentioned, before Jay-Z, man, it was fucking ludicrous. What, like, it's one thing to freestyle, but to freestyle a whole track, it's like that shit was unheard of before. So yeah, you're absolutely right. But again, it illustrates what a trickster does. They push boundaries. Can
you go into any other spirits you work with that would classify as trickster and the lessons that came from that?
I'll give a few. With Holy Saint Cyprian, right? I started working this system, right, called the Black School of Saint Cyprian of Antioch, because I wanted to practice magic. I wanted to learn. I was like, look, I'm ready to get my hands dirty. And I was always attracted to the left-hand path practices, but I was afraid of it. You know, I wouldn't go near it. And then when I finally opened this up, okay, you know what? I'm going to start practicing magic. I'm only going to stick to the right-hand path stuff. And so I decided to get into this system, you know, to learn about it. And you start off learning about Christ and the crucifixion, right? And then after that, it takes a turn, and then you dive into the left-hand path stuff. So I said, okay, I had to take a deep dive into left-hand path practices. By the third ritual, you learn a rite in which you begin to invoke Lucifer, right, the morning star. You see, here I thought that I was just going to do right hand path magic, right? But I was tricked, right? But the tricking was necessary, right? It was necessary because if I wouldn't have gone into this system, I probably would have been a polarized Magikian, right? I probably would have just stuck to the right hand path practices and stuff. And then as I learned about Holy Saint Cyprian's story, right, this was a sorcerer who then ultimately became a saint, right? He began as a left hand path practitioner. And the story goes that either he was attracted to this maiden whose name was Holy Saint Justina. She was a pious Christian woman, right? Or the other story is that he was paid by a young man who was in love with Saint Cyprian. I'm sorry, in love with Holy Saint Justina, and paid Saint Cyprian to seduce her for him. And so after 3 times of sending his most powerful legions of demons after Justina, she was able to successfully rebuke his most powerful demons by making the sign of the cross, right? According to this story. So by the 3rd time, he was broken, he was bitter, and he was frustrated and confused. And he came to and said, how the heck, how the able to resist my most powerful legions of demons? What is this source of strength, this source of power that you're tapping into, this current of energy? And she says, it is through my faith in Christ. And it makes a sign of the cross in front of him. And so the legend states that he was so moved by her faith in Christ that he immediately converted to Christianity, right? So that's one way of looking at it. But as a trickster, you're constantly thinking outside of the box. So he just was moved by her faith. No, well, as a practitioner, you know and understand that he saw this as another current of magic to tap into, one that he felt was powerful, because what he was practicing, she was able to resist that. And so when he converted, he came to Christianity not as one who's a faithful believer, right, of the religion, but rather as a magical practitioner who saw this as another current of magic to tap into, to master, right? And so that's one of the lessons that I learned from a trickster, right? And then even after he went into the church and he went from the status of being a deacon and then a priest and then a bishop and then dying as a saint, it's still alleged that despite this, he continued his sorcerer endeavors. He continued to work with the devil. He continued to work with the adversarial forces, right? And so what you get in Holy Saint Cyprian is you get a being who has a foothold in heaven, but also has a foot in hell as well. Holy Saint Cyprian is a trickster spirit. He dances between the line of order and chaos, between masculine and feminine, between youth and dotage. And with working with Holy Saint Cyprian and doing the workings, ultimately, I opened up doorways to connect with Papa Legba, my ancestral spirit. And let me tell you, I was afraid, more afraid than I was to start working with the adversary. I was more afraid to tap in with the spirits of Vodun, my ancestral path. I was scared to even approach that. And I wound up meeting some Zoes while I was in Miami, going into the smoke shop. And I got so cool with them, and I got introduced to Papa Legba through them. And so with working with the trickster, what I've learned is that they're going to trick you. They're going to deceive you, right? But it's nothing malicious. Malicious is all for your supreme growth and development. If I would have never connected with Holy Saint Cyprian, I probably would have never dove into the left-hand path practices and then changed and opened up my mind and started to see the right-hand path practices totally and completely different. And if I would have never worked with him, it would have never opened up the doorway for me to ultimately wind up back in my ancestral current of Vodun. And so, yeah, the trickster will always challenge you, will always push you to step out of your comfort zone. And it's a scary path to walk because you're walking 1 foot in the known and 1 foot in the unknown. And so you're constantly in the unknown, and it's uncomfortable. It's scary. It's nothing to pussyfoot around with. This is serious work. If you're not ready to let go, if you're not ready to transform, if you're not ready to willingly step into the unknown, then you can't really work with trickster spirits.
Shout out to Uncle Luke showing love in the chat.
Yo,
dope video. I want to touch on that point you just said, bro. How it led you back to your ancestors.
Yes.
We talked about this in our phone call the other day, but I think that's a crucial point because people think spirituality is just, I'm about to work with this spirit, I'm about to work with these demons, I'm about to work with these angels, but sometimes people skip the whole working with your higher self, your Ori, your holy guardian angel, or even your ancestors. We use it as just another practice to just be ungrounded and work on something outside of ourselves or outside of our own blood.
Indeed. I'm glad you mentioned that, because you mentioned that people skip that. I am one of those fucking people. Listen, I skipped, I jumped into working with Holy Saint Cyprian.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how you know when you have a good spirit that's walking with you, right? Because they're going to lead you into the experiences that you need to get what you need. After working with Holy Saint Cyprian for a couple of months, I remember one time I was on a three-way conversation. It was my sister, a friend of mine who practices Vodun in New York, and me. We were all talking, and she went in through her ancestors and ultimately got tapped into Vodun. You know, I was telling her how I went about this, and she's like, well, damn, you just skipped over your ancestors. I was like, oh, well, you know, it's all right, because, you know, I'm walking the left-hand path, right? And she's like, no, it's not okay. I was like, what you talking about? Long story short, the end of that conversation, what kept repeating, I kept hearing her repeat in my head over and over was, yo, like, you stepped over your ancestors, like, and you just went straight to a saint. Like, what about your ancestors? You're not feeding your ancestors. Your ancestors are starving. And that just kept repeating in my head, your ancestors are starving. Your ancestors are starving. And I just remember, like, sitting there like, and so what I wound up doing is I wound up getting a book to learn how to connect with my ancestors. And I started to practice some of the rites out of that book. And from that book, I erected an ancestral altar, right? And I started to venerate my grandparents. And so, again, with connecting with Holy Saint Cyprian, I thought all I was going to do was work with Holy Saint Cyprian just in this area strictly. But then he led me, I connected with Lucifer, I connected with my ancestors. And then with working with them, there was it felt like there was a constant pull, right? A tugging back and forth. But what I realized was that there were things that I was looking to pursue that I didn't need for my spiritual growth and development, right? Because everyone's path is going to be different, right? And so while I worked with Holy Saint Cyprian and connected with Lucifer, I worked with the Great Duchess Bonnier, I was working with my ancestors. And then there was some tension with me and the Great Duchess Bonnier. It was too much for me because I was working from three different rites at once. Like, I'm sorry, three different currents. And it's just like, it was taking a lot out of me. So I had to let go of the Great Duchess Bonnier. But I got what I needed from working with the Great Duchess Bonnier. And ultimately, Saint Cyprian led me back to my ancestors, you know, my grandparents, connecting with them. And then with working with them, and Saint Cyprian and Lucifer wound up opening up the doorways for me to connect with Papa Legba. But I think that I was always meant to connect with Papa Legba. I just had to go through my journey the way that I did, right? And so even though I tried to skip over and say, forget my ancestors, it wasn't even like I was like, forget my ancestors. I was just ignorant, right?
Yeah. You don't
Even
know
though
what you don't
I
know.
skipped over, I didn't know any better, right? And so even though I tried to skip over, Saint Cyprian still led me down that path. That's how you know you have a good spirit that's leading you, that's helping you, right? You've embodied a strong spirit that's going to take you in the right direction. Because I had to go back and do the work with my ancestors, right? And then as I kept trying to progress, it was like, wait. Before you do that, you have to go back and connect with your ancestral roots. You got to heal that gap. You need to do the work there.
They didn't let you ignore the fact that you got to do some bloodline healing. You
Yes.
got to do some generational healing.
Yes.
You may not be able to see it per se, and the results may not be as cool and profound as working with a saint or a demon, you know, but it's
Yep.
necessary. And that's the beautiful thing about ancestors, because I'm pretty sure when you started to work with them, they brought you in with grace. Your ancestors, the spirit that walk with you, they always gonna show you grace.
Yep. And then with connecting with them, you know, I wound up doing some astral work where I remember one time I left my ancestral altar. I fell asleep shortly afterwards, and I found myself in the desert, and I was brought before this being who I was talking to through this. He was in this box-like cube thingy, and I was talking to him through what appeared to be like a bulletproof glass, but the glass was like foggy. So I could see the being's eyes. I could see the being's teeth, but I couldn't really make out the being's face. And the being's presence felt masculine, but the manner in which the being expressed itself was feminine, right? So this was an androgynous being. that I was communicating with, and was asking me questions, and I couldn't really make out what the being was saying. I said, I can't really hear you. Can you like speak up a little? And then what I did hear was the being asked me, what did you come here for? What did you really come here to do? What are you looking for? And the final question that the being asked me was, why aren't you married yet? And then I immediately woke up. And so I'm thinking at the time that the being's asking me, why am I not married? Why haven't I chosen a wife yet? But the being was talking about spiritual marriage, right? Marriage between my lower and higher self, which is ultimately what I wound up doing when I connected with Papa Legba, because I had a powerful experience there. But yeah, there's work that needs to be done. Even if you do begin with the left-hand path practice, it doesn't matter if you walk the left-hand or the right-hand path. Both paths are going to take you to where you need to be, where you need to get to.
Can you touch on your experiences with Papa Legba and any other of, the trickster spirits that are categorized as that?
With Holy Saint Cyprian, you notice with trickster spirits that they're also mediators, right? They bridge the gap. They make connections between different people or different groups that normally probably wouldn't connect, right? And so as a trickster, you're not only an agent for change, for transformation, but you're also a mediator, right? Trickster spirits are go-betweens. With working with Papa Legba, what I realized is that this trickster spirit is the spirit of the dragon, right? And so what is a dragon, right? Most people just think that a dragon is a mythological being, right? But a dragon is a wild force of nature, right? And this is a being which is comprised of different parts of different animals. And so when we see the image of a dragon, we see that it has the body of a serpent, right? But has the wings of a bird, right? It probably has the talons or the claws of a falcon, right? Or bird, or the claws and talons of a griffin. And so this is a being which is comprised of different animal parts. And it's because this is a being that is a shapeshifter. It can change its form. The original dragons were the shaman of antiquity, right? Or the shaman, right? And the shaman or the shaman was a go-between. They would be the ones that would go and stand before the unseen forces, right? The spirits, and learn what is it that the spirits desire of man, right? And serve the spirits so that the spirits were satisfied, so that the spirits can open up the doorways for new experiences, right, for man. And so the shamans were the original go-betweens, right? And then as time goes on, the shaman becomes the fool in the court, right? Because in the court, you'll have the king, who most people think is the most powerful being in the entire court. But the most powerful being is really the fool, right? Because the fool is the go-between, right? The fool goes between the court and the common people. And the fool relates. Go ahead. I'm sorry, what did you say?
Messenger.
The messenger, yes. Right? And so the fool relates the message of the people to the court. And people think that the king is the most powerful being, but the fool is the only one that can stand before the king and tell him straight to his face, hey, dude, you're a sorry sack of shit. And the king just has to laugh and eat that shit, right? Because he can say things that most people can't, because he's not speaking of his own accord. He's relating the voice of the people. If any other regular person approaches the king and says that, they're either going to get beheaded or they get their limbs attached to a horse and they get pulled apart. And the king has to laugh and smile about it. But at night when he goes to sleep, that's the last thought. Yeah, that's the last thought on his mind. It's
he hear it on a loop and with a reverb.
Facts. And so the fool is the only one who can live in the king's mind rent free, right? He's the most powerful being in the entire court. He has all the powers, rights, and benefits of the king. He shares none of the king's responsibilities, right? The king is constantly under pressure. He has that sword hanging over his head. You know what I mean? If he steps out of line and he does something that causes him to fall out of harmony with the people, he can have a fucking revolution on his hands, and then the people calling for his head, right? But the fool doesn't have to worry about any of that. So he's really the most powerful piece in the entire court. And so what I learned is that the trickster is the go-between. The trickster is the shaman, right? The one who communicates the will of the unconscious, right? Who communicates and formulates a relationship with the unconscious, the unseen, and relates that message to the people.
Bro, when I had the reading with Brother Beniti, he was kind of confused because he told me that Odin and Loki is in my court. And those were the last deities he presented during the reading. And he was like, Man, I'm confused because you got all these other deities, but I was so confused because of the Norse stuff. But he was telling me like as he was doing the reading and gathering the information, he saw me as like a shaman, but my face was covered. And I know
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing with the trickster spirit, bro. It's something like with the face, like
Mm-hmm.
the face kind of shape shifts, or you can barely see it, or it's covered with smoke. And I know jinn spirits are associated with
Smokeless flame.
smokeless flame.
Mm-hmm.
He saw me as like a shaman, and people would come to me for like help with naturopathy, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something I am into in this incarnation. Like I'm into, of course, root work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm into herbs. Like I'm drinking some right now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, going back to how it shows up in our lives. I wanted us to go over, all right, somebody who just discovered they hold that archetype. What is like certain characteristics of this person? So like,
Okay.
what would you say are certain characteristic of a person who hold this
Okay.
archetype?
So if you hold this archetype within you, one word that people would usually characterize you as is being someone who's eccentric. Growing up, you might have been told that you're overly emotional, right? Or that you wear your heart on your sleeve, right?
Mm,
There's a certain level of the trickster, like for example,
okay.
you mentioned Odin, right? Odin is a wise king, but Odin is a wise old man who is childlike,
Mm,
right? So he's a childlike old man because he walks the line between youth and dotage, right? And so people might say that you're a bit childish, right? Because again, you're kind of in your own world, your own bubble, right? You don't move based off of what moves everybody else, right? You have your own internal compass, right? You learn to trust into your intuition, right? It's just naturally there. And as you get older, you start learning to trust into that and lean into that, right? And so a fool is someone, as we mentioned, is they're self-driven, right? They're self-reliant. They don't move based off what moves everybody else. So people are going to say that you're stubborn, right? People are going to say that you're eccentric. Some people might say that you're childish, right? Because you imagine, but you have to imagine, right? Because everything that exists in creation came through the imagination first, right? And so that's another thing that people are going to tell you, that you're highly imaginative, right? With being a fool, right? Being this archetype. Ultimately, the fool is someone who's self-driven and they have their own perspective on reality, and that's what they're moved by. And the deeper you get into this work, that'll start to become more and more clear to you, right? It's about learning how to trust in yourself again, and not trust in what you're told, not just
mhm.
blindly accepting what people are telling you, how people are leading you, not just blindly accepting the direction in which you're being led to walk, consciously choosing who you are and how you want to show up in reality.
You in
Yeah,
control of that. Don't nobody
yes,
got no
absolutely.
control of your
Except you.
your output.
Yeah. I wanted
Eccentric.
to
No, go ahead.
I wanted to mention with he noticed how you have a I heard you mention how he mentioned with Odin and Loki,
Hmm.
right? They're both tricksters, right? Because Odin is definitely a trickster. And what Papa Legba has shown me, right? A lot of people might find this to be controversial, right? But Papa Legba has told me that I have many faces. I play many roles. And one of those faces that he plays, one of those roles that he shows up at is Lord Odin.
Mm,
And so to the Nordics, he showed up as Lord Odin, right? Papa Legba carries his staff, right? His walking stick, which is known as the Potemita, right? The central pillar. And Odin walks around with his spear, which is called the Gungnir, I think it's pronounced, right? It's spelled Gungnir, right? And so that spear is like the Potemita, just like
mm,
Hermes is Caduceus, right? Which is like the Potemita, right? He's a messenger, right? Odin is a god of self-development, right? He's a childlike old man. Papa Legba is a childlike old man. Odin can appear with his two dogs, his two wolves, right? Just like Papa Legba shows up with two dogs, right? So you'll notice that, um,
it translates over.
yeah, yeah. And again, spirits are created out of necessity, And so there was a need for this spirit to manifest to this group of people for whatever particular reason.
A couple other characteristics and themes, if you hold this archetype, is like you said, you will most likely be very eccentric. You will most likely be funny.
Mm-hmm.
My bro Brandon, he put in the comments sarcasm.
Yep.
You know, so you'll most likely be very funny.
Mm-hmm.
Childish. You might not take things too serious, but you are also like responsible. No, I was gonna say comedians are great trickster examples in real
Indeed.
life.
Indeed. They are. They are the tricksters. They are the fool. Because they relate the voice of the people, right? They say things that most people can't just come out and say, right? And so they're that voice for us. Comedians are those that bring out laughter, right? Cause us to laugh, and you need laughter, right? Laughter is medicine, right? For the pain that we endure. People need to laugh. They need to be able to release. And enlightenment, right, or spirit usually comes spontaneously, right? But in order for spirit to come through, the spirit has to bypass your conscious mind, right? Because our conscious mind is what keeps us bound, right, and keep us repressed and limited. The comedians are those that know how to bypass your conscious mind and bring out the unconscious, right? Because that's what we all need, is to know thyself, right? And they're like a medium, and they help us to do that, right? To talk about issues that we probably normally are reluctant to talk about, but they help us to face it, right? And they veil it in comedy. It makes it okay to say that, okay, it's all right, it's just a joke, but it's actually, what he's saying is actually real. Like Dave Chappelle is like one of the greatest when it comes to doing this. You get philosophy lessons, science lessons from Dave Chappelle's comedy stand-ups, but he makes you fucking laugh and you learn a lot of shit. But he's a perfect example.
So would you say inner child work will be essential for somebody with this kind of archetype?
Yes. When you were a child, you were open, right? There was a level of vulnerability about you. That is more of who you are than anything, right? We're all vulnerable. It doesn't matter how hard you try to pretend to be or how hard you try to protect yourself. You're going to experience hardships in life, right? And so when you were a child, you were more open, right? You didn't have all of these preconceived notions that kept you bound and it kept you limited. And so you learned quickly, you picked shit up easily, right? And so with being a trickster spirit, you have to get back in touch with your inner child, right? Because that's where your creativity comes from. That's where that nuanced perspective comes from, right? That's where that, another thing too, with people who are tricksters, we're usually neurodivergent in some way. Like I was recently diagnosed last year with ADHD. I'm pretty sure I'm fucking autistic too, right? I'm pretty sure. And so a lot of times people who are trickster spirits really have a different perspective because they don't know how to read in on social cues, right? And so because of that, that's another reason why they irritate people. Most people think that everyone's the same, and we're not the same. And there are people who live their lives every day and they expect everything to constantly be the same. And that's an illusion. People who have that trickster archetype within them are people who know from experience that the world is not the way that it appears to be. And so a lot of times, many of them don't really pick up on social cues, right? They're really fucking smart, or they have all of these crazy innovative ideas, but when it comes to getting along socially, they're not really that good at it. And that's because you have that trickster archetype. You got that trickster spirit about you.
This year was like the year I really like grasped, like, damn, okay, I am neurodivergent, and I really need to do something about this shit, you know. And it's like it gets worse if you don't got like no type of thing to help with it.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know. Here in the States, many people who get deemed crazy and get like thrown in state hospitals, a lot of them in the Caribbean would be seen as a go-between, right? Like, hey, your child possesses the means to, you know, be a go-between, right, between the spiritual and the physical. And so what they'll tell you is that your child would have to immediately start going through training to learn how to tap into their gifts and learn how to control their gifts. Because if you don't receive the formal training, then you the forces are going to destroy you. See, our society doesn't really consider the spiritual, right? We're a Christian nation, right? But we don't really consider the spiritual aspect of reality. This is why there's a need for a trickster spirit, right? To challenge convention, right? To challenge what we believe to be normal, right? Because what's normal for us is not normal for another culture, right? And so you need trickster spirits to help the group, to help the people to develop alternate ways of seeing and perceiving reality, to realize that the world isn't just fucking black and white. It's more gray than anything else.
Can you touch on androgyny and its link to the trickster
Yes.
archetype? Because I think about people like Prince or even
Michael
sketch
Jackson.
comedian. Yeah, Michael Jackson.
Being androgynous, right? We all have masculine, feminine aspects to ourselves, right? And so the person who is the trickster or the fool, right, or who resonates with that archetype, they're one who reach a point in their awareness in which their consciousness is undifferentiated. It's oneness, right? There's harmony between the masculine and feminine polarities within them, right? And so they can exist in the world as either or neither, right? And so again, with walking the line between light and dark, right, between passive and active, masculine and feminine, right, you become androgynous, right? The trickster is not just a man, right, but they're also an animal, right? Because us humans, we're not just human, we're also animals, right? And so when you do the spiritual work and you connect with this part of yourself, you return to what the Bible, right, or what some esotericists would call the pre-Edenic state, right? You return to that state of being where your consciousness is undifferentiated. Adam and Lilith is in the garden originally, right? And there's complications with them too, because Lilith wants to mount Adam, but Adam refuses, right? He wants to mount her, right? But that's really the way that it's supposed to be, right? Adam is supposed to be the rock, the foundation, and she rests on top of him, right? And this is how it was in antiquity, right? But with the emergence of patriarchy, right, and these patriarchal religions, right, the masculine wants to be on top and conquer, right? And that's not how it was originally. Even when you look at the symbol of Kali's dancing around with her swords cutting heads off, right? And then, but she's in a violent rage, right? And Shiva dives beneath her, right, to stop her, right? Because she's cutting a lot of heads off, right? Meaning that she's humbling people, right? And so he comes beneath her, and then she winds up mounting him, and it becomes an act of sex. And when you practice a lot of these ATRs, right, you become mounted by the spirits, right? And they mount you via that central pillar, right? The Pote Mita, right? Papa Ligba is that central pillar, the Pote Mita, right? The middle path, right? The central pillar, and they mount you from that. But in order to achieve that, you can't be polarized. You can't be too far to the left. You can't be too far to the right, right? You can't be too far in the good. You can't be too much into the
Your
evil.
conscious mind got to be
harmonized, yes. And so in order to receive the spirit, right, you have to die in a sense, right? Die to the illusion. And when you experience this death, right, your higher self then mounts you, right? And I've had that experience when I met Papa Legba.
Integration.
Yeah. It's like you experience who you were before the fallen state. You experience the spirit of the dragon. I fell into a state of where I was possessed. My body was doing things that I couldn't control, but I was fully conscious of what I was doing, and I had no say so over it. And it's just deep, man.
Yeah.
It's a powerful experience, but that's what happens. And I'm glad that you mentioned Prince and Michael Jackson. Papa Legba has told me that there have been many people who have come to see him at the Crossroads, and those were two of the people who he mentioned to me. Prince and Michael Jackson both came to see him at the Crossroads.
Celebrities and figures, whatever, they are, I look at them as learning tools. They are examples of what it's like to be in your North Node, and they are perfect examples of certain archetypes. Going back to how it shows up in characteristics, would you say like someone who holds this archetype is like they have many different groups of friends. You know, like they
Um,
can blend in
yes,
anywhere. You know,
yeah,
they
social butterfly,
yeah.
yep, social chameleon. They have the means to do this, um, but the problem is that with being a trickster, you're open, right? And so you have you could tap into limitless potential. You have chaos at your disposal, right? That's what magic is, right? Magic is chaos. It's limitless potential, but it's limitless potential for not just empowerment and development, but it's also limitless potential for disaster, right? And
Hmm.
tragedy. And so with being a trickster spirit, you have to be mindful of the doorways that you open, right? Into your awareness. Be mindful of who you're letting in, because you're going to attract people that are going to be aligned with what you are aligned with, but then you're going to also meet other people that are going to see the benefits of a person like you and
Hmm.
try to use your energy for their personal gain. With being a trickster, you have to be you have to exercise your discernment a great deal, because you're going to attract people that are going to come and they're not going to have your what's best in you for mind. Instead, they're going to want to use you. They're going to want
Pull
to
on your
tap into siphon your
energy.
energy. Yeah.
Pull on your
Yeah.
energy. When you were saying all that, I was thinking of the word discernment.
Mm-hmm.
So you definitely gotta cover your head out here and
Facts.
do your baths. You know.
Facts. Even with even with the spirits that you like, with that you work with, your spiritual hygiene, that shit's a real big deal. And when I was working the Black School of Saint Cyprian, when I first started, I knew nothing about spiritual hygiene and
Hmm.
spiritual baths. And there were a couple of times where I can feel an awareness of something else that was dwelling in my temple that didn't belong.
Hmm.
And I had to learn the hard way how to cleanse, how to get that
Yeah.
shit out of you. Stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you touch on the Joker?
The Joker. Okay, so the Joker is the extreme of chaos, right? And the opposite is Batman. Batman is order, but order to at an extreme, right? And so the Joker is the embodiment of chaos, right? Of transformation. However, he's all the way on the left, right? Whereas Batman is all the way on the right. And
Hmm.
there's a need for both, right? Order and chaos, right? And so when you walk the path, right? Left hand path, if you lose sight of why you're walking that path, you run the risk of becoming a Joker like character, right? And what happens to some people is walking the left hand path is the path to empowerment, right? And it's consume or be consumed. And so the spirits that you're working with, that you're connecting with, these are spirits that you're going to devour, right? You're going to embody these spirits. You're going to house these spirits within your temple. Now, what happens sometimes is that people bite off more than they can chew, right? And they call upon spirits and they make deals that they're not ready for,
Hmm.
right? And so what winds up happening is that you undergo these experiences and you create a spirit that becomes so big that you can't integrate the spirit. And what happens is people run the risk of becoming totally possessed by the spirit. They become devoured, right? And
Hmm.
so it's consume or be consumed, devour or be devoured. And so if you're doing this work and you're not embodying this spirit, then the spirit is embodying you. And so we see this happen a lot of times with people who are in like organized religion. They have their faith, they have what they believe in, right? But when they meet somebody else who's of a different path, of a different faith, they feel the need to interject. They feel the need to say something, right?
Projection.
They don't, right? They don't even know why they're doing it. It's because they're possessed. Whatever spirit it is that they're working with, that spirit has embodied them, right? Because they've cast aspects of themselves into the darkness, right? There's parts of them that they don't want to see, that they don't want to meet. And so that which you cast out into the darkness, you're going to project that onto other people. We see this happen with people who are in like organized religion. This is what I believe the Joker symbolizes, right? Is a being who has gone into the darkness, but has become devoured by the darkness. They become totally and completely consumed. They lose themselves. And so that's one of the risks that you run with doing these left-hand path practices. And this is why I think middle path is really where it's
Hmm.
at. Like you have to be well-rounded when it comes to this magic shit. Like don't polarize the magic. People that usually work with Holy Saint Cyprian, I find that they either work with him in his right hand aspect or they work with him in his left hand aspect, and that's it. But there's so much to what the spirit of Holy Saint Cyprian has to offer, so many lessons that it makes no sense to polarize. So you want to be in between that order and chaos, in between the light and dark, in between Batman and Joker, because they're both mirror reflections of one another. They're both nuts. Batman could fucking, all that money that he has, he could give to Gotham PD. He could donate that shit to them so that they could lock away these criminals and reform Gotham, reform crime in Gotham, right? Reform the justice system. That's what Gotham needs. But Batman doesn't give his money for that. Instead, he spends the money, right,
doing it
becoming
himself.
Batman, right, and he perpetuates the bullshit going on. He could stop that shit. He's really no different from the Joker, from any of the villains, right? But you start to see this when you walk with the Trickster spirit. When you have that archetype in you, you can see things from different perspectives, right? You can see how Batman is just as fucking fucked up as the Joker, probably even more fucked up, because he can stop shit, but he doesn't.
You say people who carry this energy are devil's advocate?
Yes, and it depends on how you define the devil also, right? Because again, the devil is that initiatic force that's just driving man, right, to the gates of enlightenment or onto the brinks of utter insanity, right? If you are going to be a devil's advocate, right, you have to exercise that discernment.
You can see the full range, so like, yo, you're not like looking through it with like a rose-colored lenses,
Yeah,
you know, that time.
Yeah, you see the world for the way that it is rather than the way that you want it to be. And if you really want to succeed in that, then you got to open up your mind and you have to walk both paths. You realize that a lot of these spirits, right, are not just spirits, but they're also titles. They're states of consciousness, right, that any one of us can tap into and become, because we all possess that dragon spirit, right, that creative spirit. Every one of us are beings or agents of chaos, right, and of limitless potential. And so you learn about these spirits and you learn how to embody this spirit, right, so that you can transform your spirit, right, to become something else, right? You tap into your limitless potential, right, and create this being, right? Lucius isn't my real name, right? Lucius Tenebris. This is a name that came to me even before I started practicing magic, right? And then as I started doing the work, working with Holy Saint Cyprian, it came to me that who this being is, Lucius Tenebris. This is the trickster aspect of myself, right? My creative spirit. Because of Christianity, people think that you have to polarize yourself, right? You're either good or you're evil, right? But you're all of it and none of it. And with when you connect, and when you connect with that aspect of the awareness, right, the trickster, you'll see that, and the trickster will teach you that, right? Because when you work with the trickster spirit, man, you learn harsh fucking lessons. But that's because you're being taught to see the world not for the way that you want it to be, not for the way that you were told it was, but for what it actually is. Dragon also means dragon comes from the Greek term drakon or drink, which translates to see or to be sharp-sighted, right? And so this dragon spirit has always existed. There's probably at least one person with a dragon spirit in each family, and that's the person that has these unorthodox perspectives, right, that sees things differently, but they're often deemed as the black sheep or the outcast of the family. And that's the purpose of a trickster, right, is to bring awareness.
It's like no matter the lore or the pantheon, you will see that energy show up. So can you tell us a little bit about your website and the services you offer on there?
Yeah, so my website is called gazeintotheundercurrent.net. Right now, I just have 2 blogs up because I just started the website. I just put it up finally. It took a long time to bring it to fruition. But I blog on there, and then I offer some of my spiritual services. I do tarot reads. I also do dream interpretations, and I offer consultations. And the consultations are like if you need some help on your path, your practice, or even if you just need somebody to talk to, because sometimes on this path, we get isolated and we have experiences that we can't really make sense of. And it's nice if we have somebody that we could talk to who has experienced some of these experiences that could help us out and help give us guidance. And so that's why I offer spiritual consultations. But I offer all of that on my website. I'm also on TikTok. y'all can find me here on Instagram. Most of my content is on TikTok. That's the website that I've done most of my stuff on. And then I have my YouTube channel, Saint the Daemon 357, aka Lucius Tenebris.
And you said you was gonna do a blog post kind of like on a Trickster?
Yeah, no, I'm gonna do a blog on the spirit of the dragon.
Okay.
Because it's all connected because a trickster
Okay.
is a dragon.
It's Daemon Chambers, the firstbornart.com.
Tap in, gazeintotheundercurrent.net. Again, that's gazeintotheundercurrent.net. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah. We appreciate your engagement. If you like this video, check out the Creative Accountability playlist podcast for all the artists and adepts. We're gonna catch y'all in the next one.
All right.